Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Property and Investor Podcast. This is the podcast when I speak to some of the most interesting, inspiring, and resilient people in property investing and beyond. I, of course, am your host, Paul Lanfear. Now, as you know, if you're familiar to the podcast, my inner lawyer requires me to say a few words. Nothing in this podcast is financial, legal, or health advice, nor is it an endorsement of any particular strategy or anything else for that matter. Today's guest is an entrepreneur, portfolio landlord, speaker, and all-round fabulous human being, and his name is Roy Jones. Roy, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Paul. Nice to be here.
It's awesome to have you on the podcast. Now, I obviously know you very well. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a number of years, and you have got a fascinating story. So this is part of the origin story podcast that we do at this point every year. So Roy, I'm going to hand over to you almost immediately and say, take us back to the beginning, Roy. Take us back to the beginning of your origin story and tell us how we got here. As I said in the introduction, you know, you're a portfolio landlord, you're an established entrepreneur, you're a speaker, you've been over the years a mentor and many more things. So over to you, Roy.
It wouldn't be an origin story without talking about an incubator, which I only found out recently. I was in an incubator for 6 weeks, didn't even know. Priest came, weren't sure if I was going to make it because I was so premature. So we won't really start there. We'll get that out of the way.
Okay. I'll
not walk you through the primary school and all the misdemeanors there. My work life then, when I'll just spend a little bit of time at school. So I went home one afternoon and said to my mum, I'd be about 15. I've just been to the Rosler block. Okay. And she said, what's that? And I said, it's the sixth form centre. And she stopped what she was doing. And she said, sixth form, this house needs money. You need to get to work. Mm-hmm. And that was the end of my further education discussion. And it was like that, because we didn't have much money to go around, and it was just automatic. So picking something that I enjoyed, which was cars, didn't mean I was going to be a great car mechanic. And I was a pretty average, probably worse than that, car mechanic in Warrington for 6 years, sitting through an apprenticeship, fitting tow bars on the wrong end of Volvos. That might be a myth. It's that long ago, it could be true. But then realised, that when I was working for a Yugoslavian guy whose English was broken, and I'd be translating a lot of the time to the customers as to what we'd done to the car, etc. And somebody said to me once, you should be using that skill. You should be using your mouth to make a living. And funnily enough, a good friend of mine who's also a mechanic turned up in a brand new Opel Manta. They were like the RS of the days. And I asked him how he did it, and he said, I'm selling cars, Jonesy. So one Sunday afternoon, I got him a battered old Citroen. It was a 2CV, in case you need to know. Yeah. Cleaned up some fingernails as good as I could, put a jacket on, and went to every car dealership in the area. And the last one turned out to be the guy who had the Manta. And he said, oh, the owner's in. We'd had a bit of a giggle. Long story cut short there, I got weekend work to sell cars. And the first weekend, which was a trial, I sold 2 Vauxhalls. Nice. So I found my groove, left, became a car salesman, Cheshire's finest, new and used cars, sir. And that was great fun, red tie, curly perm, like all the footballers of the day. Thought it was the bee's knees with a brand new company car, not a battered old thing. But then it took a turn, really, because I sold a car to a stewardess at Manchester. And she just thought that working for British Airways is what I should be doing for the summer. So I have to say, after quite a few Sammy girls, because I wasn't sure, applied and filled out this form, and shock horror, got an interview and was offered the job. And took me 2 weeks to accept, that anybody would have said yes to this job. It was just the life of Riley. But it was just a 6-month contract. And when I told the guy I worked for I'm leaving, or wanted to leave, he just said, your desk will be here at the end of the season. So a guy that can sell cars has always got a job. Mm-hmm. But I never went back. So that was British Air Tours, which was part of British Airways. It was the EasyJet end, it was the charter part. And then the company got merged with British Caledonian. So after the first 6 months, all the long haul flights started coming: Caribbean, Africa, States, Asia. And I kept saying to myself, because a job didn't need much brain power, it doesn't. It's just customer service, tea, coffee, chicken or beef. And I was leaving every year. I was leaving for 5 years, but I'll just do an LA. I'll just do a, Mombasa, or I'll just do Hong Kong. And then, oh, now we've got Taipei. It's well, I'll just do that and then I'll leave. And it was all these new routes that were keeping me there. But interestingly, because I worked from Gatwick, they used to call it the beach fleet because we had the whole of the Caribbean. And it meant if you knew the rosters, you could go in there and design your own roster. It's like, John, you've not sent me to Lagos, have you? And it's not as interesting as NASA, Bahamas. So we were writing our own rosters in a way. And in the Caribbean, I was introduced to another steward who was into mountain bikes, in inverted commas. And I wasn't into mountain bikes. I was just banned from driving. So I had a mountain bike. So there's this association. I really didn't like the bike at all, because trying to get over the Sussex Downs for a night out in Brighton was hard work, especially after the next day getting home. And it turned out that John lived about 6 streets away from me. And we saw each other on days off. He talked about these bikes that he'd bought from Hong Kong, China. And it just didn't make any sense to me. But what was going on at the time is the cabin crew were buying cheap mountain bikes from Costco, Toys R Us in the States, and bringing them back like 4 and 5 at a time and selling them on to the public here, because we just didn't have mountain bikes anything like that price. Halfords were kind of the monopoly. Mm-hmm. They would double the price. So John had joined the bandwagon. So he managed to get enough finance together for a part-full 20-foot container, which must have been, in retrospective thinking, it must have been hilarious for the factory to ship a part-full anything, because, you need to pack these things tight, otherwise they're all damaged. So they were in his dining room. He'd done really well with them at Christmas. They would sell in through the Brighton Leader for $99.99. Off a box, they went down the stairs. And he just had a whole lot of them left in his dining room because it was now February. So my license is coming back, in April. I said, I'll help you sell them. And we were selling them in 5s in the end to wholesalers in the south of England, by 5 at, I don't know what we were charging, 65 quid. And they were selling them at 99.99. Until one day, one wholesaler said, you've got something here. Why don't you sell them at the NEC gift fair? So that's real swagman territory, and this was a brand. This bike was a brand. So we did that. We advertised at the NEC gift fair. We took an order for a 40-foot container. And the irony was when the guy said, how many in a container? And I just went, well, one in every container, meaning I thought you meant in the box. And he turned to his assistant, apparently, I heard this later, and said, we'll never see those bikes. It's like, it's lucky you did. But guess what? So me and John obviously flying to Hong Kong, went out to see the factory guy, Mr. Tong. By chance, we found one of the biggest shippers of bikes to the States. So the fact he was already shipping to Toys R Us USA was a giveaway. But there's so many agents out in Asia that you can be buying from an agent who's then buying from another agent. And when Mr. Tong took us on a boat across to his factory in China and they saluted him on the way in, his car had flags on it, we thought, this is just not an ordinary agent. This is somebody that is important here. He's a big shareholder of this plant. And that's where the story started. We asked the big, bold questions. So there was a bit of car salesman in that. When we sat there with no money, I had enough money just to probably pay a deposit on the shipments that we needed. And we asked Mr. Tong for 3 40-foot containers on 90-day credit. We'd never met him before. And when he left and said, I've just got to check your finances, I said to John, he's not going to find much from a lad that lives in 47 Montpellier Road, Brighton. No, there's no internet there. Dun and Bradstreet, we've not heard of this guy. And he came back and he'd been trying to get into the UK market. So there was an element of that we didn't know. and said, okay, I can give you 90 days credit on 3 containers, but you need to pay me a third deposit on each shipment. So recycling the money, that was our start.
Mm-hmm.
In the early days, we were selling them to bike shops and 10s and 20s, and then we added a girls' bike and as well as a men's one, and it just started to grow. And then this is the turn, that was a bad one. We decided to sell to mail order catalogs. So they demanded that the thing was ready to ride. So you couldn't ship in a box.
Mm-hmm.
You had to have an assembly line. So we thought, let's do that. So we moved north. We opened a warehouse in Cheshire, and we were assembling kits for Littlewood's catalogue, Grattan. Those days, they were the big buyers. Unfortunately, we were making 2 good bikes and 1 bad one. When you're shipping a kit from across the world, if it's not absolutely right, you end up with waiting 90 days for the blue handlebar that should have been black. So we were making a big mess. And without giving you this whole chapter and verse story, by the time we'd finished this mess, Mr. Tong came across because he wasn't getting paid to see what was going on. And by this time, I'm shortcutting this story. We were now employing 110 people. So on the production side, we had 50. The warehousing, picking parts, goods, we had another 60. And I didn't know the faces of the people we were employing. It was just exploding so fast. So the volumes were there, but the efficiency wasn't. And Mr. Tong coined the phrase after we had this awful discussion with him that I'm his $6 million man, because that's how much we owed him. And he just kept presenting this reel that was coming out of his calculator. And I had to say, stop, the pain was too much. It's about $6 million. How we'd done that in about 4 years is almost like a business story in itself, business of story of how not to do it. So there was this long meeting. Tong was ready for the airport. He was in a suit. That felt like an important meeting to us, because he was quite casual normally. We thought there was disaster coming. And naively, because I was a young man then, early 30s, I thought, when you owe somebody so much money, you're in the driving seat. But when it comes to, and the culture kicked in here, saving face, I now learned that afterwards, it was more important to Tong, because he thought his Taiwanese partners were making a joke out of him, what a mess this was. Mm-hmm. So he said, this time for me to walk away. And wow, we're out of business, and John was having a shake. His legs were kind of going up and down. I was sat there wondering what to say. And I just said, and I don't know where this came from, but Mr. Tong, if you give me the chance, I'll pay every cent and every dollar back of this terrible debt. And then did the silent salesman's close of just shut up and waited for the next person to speak. Mm-hmm. It felt like 20 minutes, but it was probably only 30 seconds. And Tong put his glasses back on and said, okay, this is not a proposal. This has to happen. And he put a line through all of the customers, all of the bike shops, all of the mail order, and left us with Toys R Us, JJB Sports, and Aldi, and said, LC, letter of credit. So to go back to these customers who've been used to a lot of credit and say, this is LC payments up front now. So letter of credit means it's a guaranteed payment. Factories are paid before they're shipped. And when you've got nothing to lose, those negotiations are pretty easy. So I remember the Toys R Us MD saying, what will you do if I say no? I said, just go walk the dog, and go and find another job. Yeah. And that was the truth. So John left. He didn't want a part of the $6 million debt. I didn't know whether I was elated or lonely or what at that stage, but you kind of need someone to share that burden with you, because I had a lot of wobbles over the time paying that back, but kept close to the customer. I always say, if you've got a customer, you've got a business. And Toys R Us were it, really. They were a huge customer of ours, big percentage of our business. And they pulled us through. The volumes were going up and up and up. They were introducing us to their European counterparts. We eventually sold bikes to 12 countries into their retail outlets. And there was a moment I'm going to think of the year now, 2004, when Tong came over, and I'd written a scroll back translated into Chinese that said, our journey, the White Brothers now, and the debt is clear. We cleared the debt. And it was quite an emotional thing for me. But for Tong, it was just another business deal. And when I felt like this burden of me being the airline steward and faking it before I make it, I mean, we used to worry that we would serve Philip Tong on his trip from Hong Kong, Heathrow, Boston, and how would he explain, that we're supposed to be in the bike business? So this burden had been carried around by me, and I wanted to tell him, this is the moment, I've got credibility, I'm okay now, nothing's going to go wrong. So when I told him early days about the story of British Airways, it was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Roy, Yang Chen, this is his key partner. He said, he was simply a farmhand. Right. That doesn't matter. Where you come from, what you've done is more important than any credentials. And they just said, so is there anything else on this agenda? I was like, is that it? This burden I've been carrying around for years doesn't move his needle at all. It was just strictly business, So that, we went on and on from that. We closed down the factory, obviously. That wasn't working. He made the goods. He shipped them. We sold them. We went back to the basics. Just the easy part for me was the selling. The complicated bit was trying to run a factory. I had no experience in that. That was a real schoolboy error. So that went till about 2012. Every business has a lifespan. We eventually had our customers doing exactly what we could do, so there was no space for us left in that world. There were shipping containers from the factories they'd chosen, didn't have to buy from a Roy. But on the exit, because that was also quite an emotional thing for me. With Tong, we had to close it down, we had to find new suppliers we had the Mattel contract for Barbie, we had to try and make sure all the customers were happy. So that was a lot of work. I had to interview other factories, to make sure they were right for the customers. And I asked Tom for a certain amount of money to do that, and was able to say, it's time for you to do the right thing, because I did the right thing back in whatever year it was, 2004. So there's the bike journey.
Oh, that's remarkable. I mean, I appreciate you don't want to delve too much into the detail of it for the purposes of brevity, but how did you get in a $6 million hole? I mean, just give us give us the executive summary of that. Like, how does that happen?
So we didn't have the right people. So we had to finance. I mean, the business exploded. When you sell one item to a mass market customer, and they say, okay, have you got another 3 items, ladies, gents, boys, girls? The volumes were enormous. So when you're getting into that big volume and your margin's off, so we had a finance manager who's really an IT guy, and he probably would have been ideal. We had 2 bike shops at the time. He would have been ideal to oversee the finance of those. But this business became something like an $18 to $20 million turnover business within 2 years because of the volumes that the customers were placing. So, I think back then Toys R Us probably had 60 stores. They were adding 5, 6, 7 stores every year. Big shippers of merchandise. Our peak, we were doing between 400 and 450,000 units. So it was just a mess. We didn't know what we were doing. We were green. We were paying too much rent. We had more reject bikes in the end than we had good ones. That was what was happening. And, I employed my competitors' returns goods line manager, because that goes on in mail order. A lot of customers send it back for the slightest thing or get it wrong, putting it together. And returns those days used to be about 20%. So it's almost a business to sell it to the trade, assembled. That's what I got. I got a return goods line manager that was making return goods all the time. They should have been new.
And it's really fascinating, isn't it? So many people would have walked away, and they would have said, "This is more your problem than mine," because he was 6. Effectively, in a way, I suppose you were holding the cards, aren't you? You'd become, in many ways, the bank's problem because you owed them so much money, in a way. But in this instance, so many people would have walked away for much less as well. You know, they would have just said, "This is your problem, not really mine. Good luck." But you didn't. You know, with obviously a few more grey hairs. Not that you've got any grey hairs, right? But with the years of maturity you now have, looking back on that, do you know why? You know, as a younger man, you did that rather than just saying, "Right, I'm on to the next thing."
That's an easy answer because I've reflected on it so many times. So business-wise, I thought we're still really onto something here. I don't want to lose this because I'd seen what Tong had managed to do in the States. It was like, we really screwed up here and we could probably put it right. That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound mushy, but this is the truth. I felt really bad when Tong said, "My Chinese partners, they're laughing at me." Mm-hmm. Oh man. And I've caused that. Mm-hmm. Bearing in mind, you know, we'd been a bit of a fake with the whole British Airways thing. So there was that was part of the answer. I wanted to put that right. Mm-hmm. When I was saying, "I'll pay every cent and every dollar back," I was also saying, "I'll restore your name." That's what I was saying. And that is the truth. Mm-hmm. And we really were close. We never had a piece of paper between us, a contract of supply. He used to say, "You get the orders, we'll make it." You know, that we went back to that one, and that was more fluent and successful. But we were really close. Mm-hmm. You know, I went to his daughter's wedding. I mean, these relationships, they develop over honor in China. And I was lucky to find an honourable Chinaman, you know, and somebody that was a big hitter. And I'm sure, as in with any culture, there's good and bad. Mm-hmm. And people say, "What's your advice on trying to find the right person in China?" I haven't got it because I think I was so lucky. Mm-hmm. But I found a man with integrity. And when you around somebody like that, your integrity goes up a factor too. Mm-hmm. So that I did the right thing is probably how I'd put it.
So I suppose reflecting that back, you know, he had taken a risk on you, and you were, I suppose, pulling out all the stops to reward him for having taken that risk. And I think all of us listening to this podcast have over the years had people, you know, give us that chance, give us that break, and you do want to reward them, don't you? You know, because nobody needs to do it. I think it's also fascinating, you know, that sentence about, you know, when you left the car sales job, and I can imagine you was an excellent car salesman, Roy. I can imagine the Roy charm coming out.
Is that a compliment?
Yeah, no, definitely. You know, the fact that your desk is always here, I think that speaks volumes as well, doesn't it? You know, your desk is always here, because you know, having left that role, they wouldn't have said that unless there was a, you know, they had confidence in there. And it reminds me of when I left my last corporate job. I got the CEO sent me a message saying, "I need to have 5 minutes with you," and I was like, "Fine." And you know, I had no idea. I didn't know whether it was going to be, you know, some guy yelling down the phone at me. And he just said, "So what's all this about then, Paul?" And I told him, you know, about all the property stuff. And he goes, "Oh, right. So you just want to kind of make your own way and, you know, try your own thing for a while, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, that's exactly it. You summarized it really well." So that's fine, Paul. When you want a proper job, just give me a call and I'll give you a proper job. I was like, "Fair enough, mate." You know, and it's lovely to leave on those sentiments, isn't it, with people? And I, you know, certainly I would always wish to do that for people who work with us. Is, you know, you always try and wish people well. And so airline stewards have a reputation, Roy. And I feel like we've glossed over this. And obviously I don't want to get into the detail of it because this is a family show. But is it true, the speculation that happens around airline stewards? Are they having the time of their life as they travel around the world? Or is it a terrible grind from start to finish?
One thing I realised when I joined is I was in the minority as a straight man.
Yeah.
And let's put it this way. Even when you look like this, when you're outnumbered by girls 10-1, you can get lucky. What was a shock was coming home. We used to live, to start with, in Crawley. And Crawley is not the most happening place. You know, I've been used to probably better nightlife in Warrington and Chester. And there was kind of 3 or 4 pubs. We were going out and wondering why the girls didn't find us so attractive. It's because the ratios were now 1-1. You know, we couldn't convert 1-1s.
So the maths was no longer on your side.
Without getting into the to-ing and fro-ing, you know, just the ratio alone made it very interesting.
Okay.
And, you know, being entitled Roy the boy, obviously can't get away with that at this age. That sometimes that would play against me. It's like, oh, you're not, almost like the name came before the person. It's like,
Oh
you're not
no.
Roy the boy, are you? I mean, there was no other Roys. It's an
Yeah.
unusual name, isn't it?
So you became notorious by
Oh,
the sounds of it.
own goal already, you know, because everybody's going to be kind of herded in a corner away from me at the bar, because I've got this reputation that's, you know, unworthy.
And I want to transition into kind of obviously we've done the kind of the one of the entrepreneurial pieces. I know there's others as well, and then obviously we want to transition to the property. I suppose just hovering over the sales point. I happen to think, if anybody was to ask, what is the most important, one of the most life important skills to learn, it would always be sales, if nothing else than just to sell yourself. So do you have a particular resource or book that you've read that you think is useful in terms of selling?
Well, one that I've read, because let me think. My sales skills inherently, I'm a interested in people type. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a curious person about other people. So that in sales, number one, build rapport. You know, that's the very first step. I see so many people come in with a business proposition before they even know each other. You know, you're pitching at something that's blind. That for me is one of the things. One of the sales elements of people make a mistake with. I'm just going to go off on a slight tangent to the question because I think there's learnings in it. The pick the phone up attitude has done me so well. So my son, when he first got into sales, he did a year out from uni and he said, oh, the company's working for, he said that they love the fact that I really enjoy cold calls. It's like, did you ever hear anybody say that? Yeah. And I said, you know what, I used to, because it's tingly. It's a bit like presenting to an audience. You know, you don't know how this is going to go. But when you've made a friend of a total stranger who's had the day interrupted by you, there's something in that. So thinking that it might just be, no, I don't want what you've got, mate, and that's the end of it. Well, that's fine. I can cope with that. You don't have to hang around and have them annoyed. So you just go away. But the part of the bike story that I skipped over was when we were about to go off to see Mr. Tong to ask for more merchandise. We were in Toys R Us all the time because we thought that's perhaps a customer that we can sell to. And in there was another competitor bike to Tong, and it was made in the States. It was a United States company. And I don't know where this came from, but we wondered, if you were a consumer, how would you get the parts? So if you needed a saddle or a tire. So we stole one of the manuals out the back of the saddle in the Toys R Us store. Naughty. I mean, people used to do it to us all the time when we were selling in there. And I telephoned the number that was on there. It was a free phone number. And it rediverted to the States. And this man answered the phone. And within about 3 or 4 minutes, he said, do you want to be my agent that will hold these parts and sell them to consumers? And I said, who is this? It was the owner and the president of the company answering the phone on a Saturday morning. So he was in pain because his UK agent that should have been dispatching all these parts was gone AWOL. And it was an important account. Similar to Tong, sold Toys R Us in the States, trying to establish himself in the UK. It wasn't a great start. He had 4 bikes, all kids' bikes, and nobody was his backup parts. So what was happening is customers were turning the whole bike and asking for credit. So he said, do you ever come to New York? Yeah. Looked at my roster and I said, I'm there Thursday. He's going, oh, what are you doing here? I said, I travel here, it's like, God knows what never got the truth. So another fake it before you make it. And I met this gentleman, Mr. Kamler. He's the second biggest shipper of bikes to the US and was nervous. I knew it was the president of the company. He wanted to have me buy his bike, sell them to Toys R Us. It was a Saturday, so I had to go meet him when he was off to see his boys play baseball. So I turned up off the Greyhound bus in this little tiny hamlet outside of New York, him and his stretch Merc, in his baseball jacket, me in a suit with a red tie. And he opened the window and just said, "Oh, you Brits." He said, "You crack me up. You know, it's where's the bowler hat?" It was like, oh, I'm a bit overdressed. So we had a discussion at the pizza place on the back of a paper plate on how much per unit he was going to pay me and John to handle spares for Toys R Us. And he said, "I can go to $2 a bike. And all you do is you just hold the parts somewhere and you send them out by the mail to the customers that want a saddle and want this and want that." So I said, "How many bikes did you ship?" And he said, 49,000. Right. So this is more money than I'm making as a steward. And I've got to pay the postage. That's it. Find a lockup. So we found a lockup in Brighton, like one of these Muse houses, which was all great, you know, all fit in there, no problem, until the truck arrived, which was a 20-foot container on a 40-foot bed, and couldn't get it down the cobbly street. We're having to promise bikes to all the neighbours because they couldn't go to work. It was a disaster. But, you know, the costs out of that were probably £200 a month for the storage and me and John doing the mail. So we probably made about 60,000 quid out of that, just handling his parts. So what a bit of chance that was. But it's pick the phone up. So just make the call, the call, and ask those big questions. You can get away with not being a salesperson at all if you can ask the bold question. You can almost build rapport, by making the call, by just, grabbing hold of yourself and going for it, and then asking for the business at the end. It's like, can we go ahead with your proposition or my proposition? What do you think? And then be quiet. That is cutting out a big chunk of the sales process. But building rapport, making the call, asking questions, and doing more asking than telling. And then, "I've heard you say all this. So if I do this, 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 and this, can we go ahead with that? That sounds great. That's what you said. Feels like you said you want. Is that right? So off we go." And that works for any product.
I love it. I love it. That reminds me when I was doing the property management stuff, and I would either get an inbound call or I would be calling what I knew was a portfolio landlord, so hundreds and hundreds of houses. And you'd have the call with them. And there would always be a point where it was like, is it worth meeting? So it'd be like, shall we meet? And that, you normally you'd have the rapport stage by that, and they'd be like, yes. And then they said, "So when?" I said, "What about right now?" And I tell you what, the asking for the meeting right now, I'll come to wherever you are, has got me more meetings than I think probably most property management companies in our locality. Because when you ask like right now, they're on the phone to you and they think, "Do you know what? Right now is good." And I've had all kinds of interesting conversations with people and learned a lot and met interesting people. So definitely, I think picking up the phone is fantastic. Right.
Another trick, by the way, is an NDA. So this doesn't work for most sales situations, but if you're talking about a big proposition, and the bike business to now, there's more to the story. And part of it was me taking on a brand called Hang 10, which you'll no doubt as a surfer know. So sold in the States, not sold in Europe. And I wasn't sure if I was excited about that or not, because have you heard the African shoe salesman story from the 50s? So shoe manufacturer in the UK sends its 2 salesmen to Africa. First guy comes back and says, "Boss, we're never going to sell any shoes there. They're not wearing them." And the second guy comes back and says, "We're going to clean up, boss. Nobody's got any shoes."
Yeah.
I didn't know whether it was one or the other with this brand. Is it not sold in Europe because nobody really wants it? Or can we really go to town because no one's got it?
Yeah.
But when you get as far as Sports Direct as your only option to sell it, you know that you're kind of running out of runway, because Mike Ashley's not that friendly to brands.
Yeah.
And when a guy in the rag trade said to me, "How did you get the meeting? One call with his FD." I said, "I've got a proposition for you. It'll take me 10 minutes. Before I come and see you, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement." And he said in his best Cockney accent, which I won't try, "You really got my attention." Like that got the attention. So it's a mystery kind of thing, There's something left that And there's an element to that in yours. It's like, this guy wants to see me straight away. That's really intriguing. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah. Very good. So then let's take us on the transfer. Let's say we'll leave the entrepreneurship there. But obviously you're a portfolio landlord and you've been in the business for a long time, which means you must have ridden the waves and also been through all the storms as well. So how did you transition from entrepreneurship to property? How did that work?
It's been fairly recent, the property thing, seriously, because when I lost everything in that bike business. I had nothing left. I was driving a 100,000-mile car and said, never again will I have all my money in one thing. I never actually thought the business could fail. It was just naive.
Mm-hmm.
So when things started to get good and we paid the debt back and the company was making good money, I bought some holiday lets because I wanted a diversification in what I was doing. I'd learned a lesson. So they kind of chugged along for years. 2 made money, 2 didn't know what I was doing. It was just simply an investment. I've learned more in the last 4 or 5 years in property than, holding those since 2005. So that's how I got into property. But wanting to do more in property recently has taken me into some semi-commercial stuff. And as you might be able to tell, I'm a risk taker, Paul. So there's a friend of mine who runs a CEO group in the States, and he says, you are an entrepreneur, ready, fire, aim. And that kind of fits me. Think about it later. I mean, things happen, but there can be a lot of fallout. So kind of went into, investing in more property without really knowing what I was doing. So one of the areas we went to was south of England. So my ex's brother was a tradesman, so we're buying an auction in Portsmouth. Oh man, I live in Cheshire. It's like now I realise what a silly strategy that was. And if I could throw a ring around all the properties and put them in one location, I'd do that. But I was chasing the deal. So I've got them in different locations, which makes life really complicated. Coming to you, being around other property people at the breakfasts and, some of the one-to-ones and the inner circle stuff we do, I realised that some of those basics you can attend to later. So you can find a team by, networking. So who's your go-to person for handiwork? And I use a lot of letting agents for that now. What's your black book? Can you help me out? I'm a landlord, please. So learned a lot along the way, and every day's a school day, isn't it? You're learning as you go.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I have learned is that I'm not the only one with these problems. And it's nice that, I think, putting a compliment back your way. I think in the inner circle work that you do, where you say, here is a scenario of one of my properties, warts and all. This is a mistake I made. And I'm going, I made that same mistake. And that's been really useful to not start thinking I'm the schmuck and everybody else has got it right. It's like, what do they call it on social media? Thinking that someone else is having a better time. I can't remember the phrase. And you're the one that's missing out. Failure of missing out, but it goes on in business that too, doesn't it? You think everybody else has got the fast car, the great lifestyle, the tenants never cause them any hassle, it's all running smoothly, and it's me that's in the middle of all this mess.
Well, that's definitely like part of the motivation behind it as well, is that and this is not true of everybody, so I'm not seeking to be unkind, but there's definitely an element of that kind of slightly narcissistic, sociopathic kind of thing, isn't there, in the industry, where everything is made to look perfect and that everything, these are what your numbers should look like. And then when us mere mortals go out into the world and we replicate the model and it doesn't quite look like it was presented to us, I think when you do that in isolation, you think, oh, it's me. Oh, I've got this wrong. But what you notice is if you can herd 12 people around a table and you can kind of share genuinely what it looks like, what you discover is everybody has got a shared experience. It's just not the highlight reel. And the outcome of that is people have that realization that it's not them. It's not that they haven't done it very well or what have you. It's that that's the reality, and just that what's presented to us isn't the reality. And I have witnessed, you know, obviously through the breakfast and the inner circle, the transformation that has for people. You can see the weight lift off their shoulders, and that, you know, and then it opens the floodgates to them just cracking on and be, you know, and getting the job done, because they know, you know, they know the path now. Yeah, so that's definitely a motivation behind it.
It's quite a lonely business, really. You know, my commute is upstairs. You know, that's it.
And I actually don't think that's the way it should be. You know, I think we are community-based creatures. I think we're tribal creatures, and I think we're actually meant to share these journeys together, aren't we? You know, we're not meant to go alone. I mean, that's one of the other observations that, you know, some of the most successful people who've ever rocked up have said is like, oh my God, it's so much easier not doing this alone. And you look at them and you think that person could never be lonely. Look how successful they are. But it's a difficult business to be in. Like all business is difficult to be in, isn't it? So tell us a life lesson, Roy. I mean, you've got no doubt lots of life lessons you could share with us. But tell us a life lesson. So what I mean by this is a life-defining moment. It can be a good one or a bad one that significantly changed your direction of travel. And the key point of the lesson is not so much the stories are important, but it's what we can take into our own lives having listened to you, Roy.
I would have said don't give up.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've already said that in you know, how I went about the bike mess.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought that my biggest accomplishment would be coming back from a fall. You know, we always think that it's when I reach this number, or when I've got this kind of freedom, or when I've got X amount of houses, or a place on the beach. And, you know, with their goals and visions. But as an accomplishment, to shake hands with a Chinaman who really was a stranger, mm-hmm. and be able to come back from that, you know, commit to it and come back from it. I was like a possessed, driven man in those days. You know, the energy and the hours that I was putting in just didn't even seem to make me tired. Mm-hmm. It was something bigger that was going on for me. And I don't know where that came from. You know, it was probably something that we've covered already. But there is something that you don't know about me. And in 1990, I was attacked in Africa. I was a steward at the time with British Airways. Right. And without getting into the gory detail, it was mistaken identity in the wrong place at the wrong time by a local who had been beaten up. And I was attacked by this guy with 2 broken bottles.
Oh my God.
And I had this close to death experience, which actually meant that I remember looking down on me on the floor in this huge pool of blood. So that's all a bit morbid. And it played out okay, you know, 29 stitches later and a doctor. It was all happened in Africa, this, I think I might mention. Something clicked for me. So, you know, I'm about fun. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought, am I going to keep sensible in Paul's interview for an hour? That's going to be a real stretch for me, because people are going to listen to this and don't want the comedy show, Roy. Simmer it down. But it gave me an attitude of, my God, it could finish in a moment. Mm-hmm. And nearly did. Mm-hmm. So I look for the positives. I look for the fun. I look for getting real with people. You know, it's like somebody's having a glum day. Mm-hmm. It's like, let's just be grateful and thankful a bit, you know, trying to gently remind them that, and I don't always do it. Sometimes I'll just try and make them laugh. It's like, mm-hmm. A laugh is a short distance between 2 people, isn't it? So that was a moment for me in 1990. I don't know how old it would be, 28, let's say. And I'm on a spiritual path. I have a spiritual element to me. And we have this phrase which goes, the grit and the grace. So sometimes when you're right in the mire, like right up to your neck in the mud, you just think it's the worst thing. And then the grace is later, when you look back and go, Well, thankfully I was in the mud, because look at what that made happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thankful for that moment, really, that close to losing my life experience, because it's definitely shifted my attitude.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not jumping up and down every day, with uh, my kids used to call me Tigger. I'll just tell you what they call my ex, but it was a Winnie the Pooh character. And I am like that. Doesn't mean that I'm Tigger every day, but I try and make light of situations that are disastrous. I've just had an update this morning as an example. We've got a property literally on the beach in Devon.
Yeah.
And it's getting battered by an easterly 30-mile-an-hour wind. And as a result, the spray is hitting the house and the road is under threat. It's getting washed over by the tide.
Yeah.
This was an investment going back to 2006. And when my mum said, "Oh, no, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, we might put it on the market. We could say, you can throw a pebble from the property into the sea. I won't mention that sometimes the sea throws them back again, which is what's going on this morning." It's not on the market, so I hope I've not shot myself in the foot with that. I don't know whether that's a life-defining moment or advice, but I try and see the brighter side of things.
Definitely. And that's certainly my experience. I know it's the experience of others. We've got a mutual friend who I don't know whether she reveals to you this whether she's revealed this, but she refers to you in private as her property dad. And she means that very, very affectionately, because of all the support that you've given her over the years. Okay, so that's a life lesson. That's really, really good. So as we kind of move towards a bit of a conclusion, what's next for Roy? What's the direction of travel? So, what's important now? Where are you heading? What are you optimized for?
I'm coming out of a divorce, so it's meant that I've been tied to what I can do with my own money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if we're specific in which category of property I'd like to do more with, it would be commercial.
Yeah.
I like commercial with resi above. They seem to work quite well. Although you've got to be careful with what will be left on the high street, because a lot of it's transferring over to internet. But I've also got the stomach for a JV, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I used to play five-a-side, and the retired PE teacher used to take it, and he used to say, "I'll pick the teams. We're going to go for experience, a mix of experience and youth. So it'll be us lot that don't move very quick, and then the energy, the runners. So we'd be more strategic." And I think that works in business. When you get to my stage in life, I can't do the days of the pay and tongue back, the 70, 80 hours a week and traveling here, there and everywhere. It's just, I could do it, but I couldn't sustain it. So it wouldn't be realistic. So, experience and youth, I think a JV with somebody that's got a lot of energy, a younger person, a younger Jonesy, who can do a lot of the grunt work. Yeah. Because I think as an experienced hand, I'm just a steady hand on the wheel, really. When a crisis comes, I've had more than most people have had haircuts. So, they don't kind of stick to me so much. They've got a Teflon coating on for that. So, yeah, I've got a stomach for that. I'd be excited about doing that with somebody younger. And at the same time, openly, mentoring and coaching. Mm-hmm. The element of coaching and mentoring I didn't get when we were making lots and lots of mistakes. Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of a giving back there as well. You get a lot of free brain power with Roy Jones, although I didn't get early days when somebody would hand me a business card and all these letters, I would just start using bigger words. It's like, my God, does that even mean anything? I would be saying things like irregardless until somebody that's not a word, that, Roy. So architects have all these letters, or somebody like you, Paul, set the bar. And my business card would just say Roy Jones. It's like, where's my letters? So I decided to put TOL on there. And it was only after 2 years that somebody said, "What is that?" Because nobody ever says what all these letters stand for, do they? But it looks better, TOL. So I said 3 O levels.
Okay.
No, I haven't got such brain power after all. It's life experience. It's not academic stuff in any matter.
Yeah. But there's plenty of depth there. And then health is wealth. So I know you've got a strong spiritual practice and you take care of yourself. So give us between 1 and 3 things that are kind of daily rituals that
Meditation.
that you would think would contribute towards listeners' resilience.
Yeah. Meditation. So this is an actual daily routine for me, not 30 days a month. Sometimes it could be 20.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Wim Hof breathing, because we don't breathe.
Yeah.
People breathe when they exercise, but don't generally breathe. With some exercise, cold shower.
Okay.
And probably yoga, about an average of 3 days a week. One of the yoga that I use is called Kundalini, and they say that spine flexibility is a measure of how old our bodies really are. Mm-hmm. And I get that. You see people seizing up or, not walking right, and just some of the twists and turns. Even, just think about how many times in one day the average person lifts their arms above their head. Mm-hmm. And before I started yoga, I was thinking, you just don't. Mm-hmm. I mean, you might, when you're in the sea because you're getting yourself on a board or in and out, but generally we don't. So yeah, meditation, some cold showers, yoga.
Very good. So, I mean, one of the kind of wake-up calls that I had was somebody one of the fittest guys I've known, I think he was once like a Royal Marine and all the rest of it. He's been fit all his life. So like permanent six-pack since the day he was born. Great family guy. But he said to me, he said, Paul, the thing you need to get your head around is flexibility is going to be the biggest determiner of your well-being later in life. And I was like, really? And he goes, yeah. If you look at all of the sportsmen, one of the things that the sports men and women is they all work on flexibility, but you've got to start it much earlier than you think you're going to need it. Hence why, I've dipped my toe in that yoga water. And obviously you came on the retreat and we explored a bit of yoga there, which for most of us was totally taking us out of fish out of water. And what amazed me about the whole retreat, and particularly the yoga, was just how much everybody went for it. It would have been easy. It would have been easy just to kind of not be surly about it, but to be disengaged from it, from like, I don't really want to play. I don't really know how to do this. So I'm going to kind of stand in the corner and not play. But like, it was baffling to me because I was looking around and everybody was just like, let's go. And that was true of every instruction everybody got was just let's go straight from the beginning. So I mean, along that lines, I mean, you've had a couple of friends on the podcast, you've come to the breakfast, you've done the inner circle more than once, and indeed you came on the retreat. Any comments, observations, thoughts on any of that?
What I enjoy about the breakfast and the inner circle is that there is just no competitive element. No one is bigging anything up. You set the tone by saying leave your ego at the door. That I think that works. It's almost like, right, let's do that. But people actually follow it. And I enjoy being able to tell the story the way it is and hearing other people's story. And nobody's looking for an angle. It's not like, oh, I've heard of a nice cheap property there. I'll make a note of that, make the call when I've left the room. None of that goes on. I don't know any other business environments that I've been in where you've not had to watch your back in that way. It's very open. I enjoy that part of it. And that when you put something out there that you've got a problem with, the advice is coming back from the heart. It's not strategic because it might suit the person that's giving it to you. If you think about people that you pay a fee to, and obviously lawyers, accountants, tax, etc., a vested interest in perhaps complicating it, making it a bit more long-winded because and this is not a personal point, because I know you wouldn't do this, but the longer the thing goes on, the more turns of the wheel go on, the more hourly rate happens. I've been on the receiving end of this with my separation. It's cost me a lot because it's been made more complicated than it needs to be. So my male man who's passed just used to say, watch where your advice is coming from. And if you question somebody's motive, then you're not getting the best advice. If you've got a question mark over it. But those environments, the advice is heartfelt from people who really know what they're doing or have got a wealth of experience. And it's the same for you. When your stuff, we do one-to-ones together, thanks to the inner circle. I know that when I say, here's my portfolio, what would you do if you were me?
Mm-hmm.
It's just coming from a voice of experience. And I've taken action, as you know, as a result of a couple of those meetings, and done exactly what you said you'd do. Yeah, enjoy it. I better not big you up too much. You'll never get your head out the door.
That's very true. That's very true. Okay, Roy, where can we send these fabulous people? So where do you want me to direct? I will obviously put it in the show notes as well. So where do you want me to direct people to if they've, I mean, you've talked about all kinds of interesting things, including, being receptive, potentially joint ventures and all the rest of it. So where do you want me to point these good people to?
So you'll post my email?
Yes.
roy@oldwhiteproperty.com.
Yep.
And my telephone number. I'm open to just direct calls. Pick up the phone.
Wow. Okay. Pick up the phone. There you have it, ladies and
I think
gentlemen.
I said recently, I've got this pet hate that people that ring me and they see the missed call and they think that constitutes a call back. Mm-hmm. So I have got voicemail. I like a voicemail to understand what the call's about, because obviously we get pounded, don't we, by a lot of spurious calls. So you wouldn't just make a call back to one of those numbers. So yeah, leave me a message.
Perfect.
Make it clear as to who you are, what you'd like.
I think that's fabulous. I have my own policy that if someone doesn't leave me a voicemail message, there are no circumstances in which I'm calling that number back. So I think you've shared some real wisdom there.
I've just got a problem with that, because sometimes when you want a delivery and the delivery driver's lost, that might be a call that you really want to take, and it's a number unknown. So I'd waver in and out of that.
Well, it's not always easy, because there are some organizations where apparently they have a policy that they can't leave voicemail messages for whatever a reason, which seems a bit archaic in this particular day and age, but no doubt they've got a reason for it. Look, Roy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. It's been a long time in the making. We'll put all this stuff in the show notes so people can track you down. The last thing that remains for me to say is a huge, heartfelt thank you, Roy Jones, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you too. Cheers.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've really enjoyed the podcast. If you have, please like, follow, subscribe, send it to a friend. And of course, to discuss resilience, property, all the stuff that Roy and I have talked about, please come and join me at the next Property and Investor Breakfast. Keep well, speak soon, and thank you very much for listening to the podcast.